but I'd actually I've forgotten it had been 10 years. Um, and I was honored, obviously, to be asked. I haven't been that engaged in the Forest School Association side of things. Perhaps my focus has always been with the older cohorts, not so much at the early years. So it was lovely to be asked, and it was a lovely opportunity for me to reflect again on my Forest School training, which at the time, like most people who've been through the Forest School leader training process, it is very early years focused. So at the time I was working as a youth worker, doing a lot of work with teenagers, and I did a lot of reflection at that particular period around the usefulness of the Forest School leader training in the context of me working with teenagers. But I kind of hadn't gone back to it since. And after I was invited here, I just thought, yeah, look, there's an awful lot to unpack there. So yeah, in the context of this particular webinar, I did my Forest School training with Kerry and Carol. Too many people to name, but Leanne from Bridget's Garden approached me. She was the education officer in Bridget's Garden, which are in Oughterard or Roscahill, and I was a youth worker in Oughterard at the time, working for a family resource centre. So my focus wasn't very much early years. It was all about working with teenagers, but I had a little bit of work with Leanne, and it was just she was the one who put it on my radar, and I kind of just stumbled across it in a way, and I was so delighted I did. We were down in Crannog, in Marion's site, and there were just so many people that I've crossed paths with since. It was a fantastic experience. I suppose what I'm going to do tonight is talk you through a number of different areas of my experience. I want to tell people a little bit um about my background. I think it's important that people have an idea of where I'm coming from as a practitioner, but probably as a person as well. I want to tell you a little bit about Venture Out, the organization that we founded and the organization which we worked through. And I suppose primarily the focus on tonight is the work that we do with teenagers and how we developed our practice in Venture Out to attract, to engage, and to support teenagers in the work that we do. Uh, there's going to be loads of content. So what I'd encourage people to do is throw in any questions that you have in the comment section, and we'll get around to questions. But if there's something that people is just really pressing at that particular time that somebody wants to jump in, you're absolutely free to. I can understand how sometimes at the particular moment somebody might have need a bit of clarification, and revisiting that at the end of the presentation might work. So by all means, if anyone has any comments or suggestions as we go, don't worry, you're not going to throw me off my rhythm or anything. You just shout out or put your hand up. But absolutely, at the end there'll be plenty of time for questions. So the title of tonight's presentation is Outdoor Developmental Work. So it is Forest School, but more broadly speaking, what we in Venture Out probably don't use the terminology Forest School too often. And then on a different side of the spectrum, we try not to use the term adventure therapy too often, although we do interlock and interchange these different descriptions. Really, what we describe our work is outdoor developmental work. So it's outdoor based. It's very much focused on developmental or the development of the participant. Um, and then tonight as I mentioned, we'll be focusing very much on teenagers. Now, can I figure out how to change my slides? Oh, there we go. Just a quick introduction. My name is Barry Dillon. Um, my current role is I don't know how the term CEO sits with me, but I've been told by the social enterprise support workers that we need to use it more frequently. We're a registered charity. We're based in Galway. We describe ourselves as a social enterprise, and we operate very much in the area of social care. So it's youth work, it's personal development. There's there are programs that we offer across the life course, from maybe not so much early years, but certainly children, teenagers, families, and we do an awful lot of work with adults as well. My background started years and years ago. My primary degree was in business studies, and I spent a little bit of time following that degree, working in commerce and banking and finance. And I really just, it just wasn't of interest to me in that regard. And, I was never particularly comfortable in that environment. So I went traveling, like many young people do. And I was always passionate about the outdoors and outdoor pursuits. And I found myself, instead of working in Irish bars and different kind of jobs in that regard, I started working in adventure sports guiding, in various places around the world. And it's just a decision I made while I was gone, that when I came back to Ireland, it was something that I wanted to get involved in. So when I returned, I moved over to the west of Ireland and I did an outdoor facilitation course. It was a year-long course, and at the end of it, I was qualified to lead walks as a mountain leader. There was a single pitch award for rock climbing, kayaking, surfing, paddling, all those different adventure sports. And for a short amount of time, I worked in that industry. And while I really enjoyed the skill development, I think what I probably got more out of was the interaction with the participants, and really getting an idea of how much, uh, how many other soft skills that the participants were learning as a result of engaging in these outdoor activities. And I suppose that's very much where Venture Out was born. Long story short, I worked in youth work and family support for a little while. But Venture Out is very much a marriage of my business background, the time I spent in the outdoors, both as a practitioner, but also from a personal perspective, and then moving into youth work and social care, and trying to use the outdoors to have an impact on the participants that we were working with. I think the Forest School leader training was absolutely fantastic. Um, and at that particular time, as I finished the Forest School training, we were just setting up Venture Out. And it was quite interesting doing my assessment. And it was my assessment. It was the manual that we needed. We needed to deliver a pilot for a certain number of weeks, and I I really wanted to work with teenagers, and I remember the two facilitators who come over from the UK. Their advice to me was they weren't able to give me too much advice. They were like, "We're really interested to see how this works because we don't have too much experience in this particular age group." So they were as interested to find out how the pilot would work, and I suppose that's probably the start of a lot of the work that we do at the moment, which, using the forest school skills that I learned from that forest school training and trying to bring it into my own practice with teenagers. So a lot of tonight will be very similar to the practice you're doing with early years, if it is mostly forest school leaders who are on the call. A lot of the same activities, but they'll just be delivered slightly differently. And the audience being teenagers, the approach is going to have to be a little bit different. So my presentation is, it's a number of suggestions, ideas that I've taken as that stuff that we've learned over the last 10 years. I suppose the approach that we take, it certainly isn't a one size fits all. My colleague Nick, who co-founded Venture Out, he delivered an awful lot of the programs very differently to me. And then we have a number of facilitators who come in and work with teenagers as well, and they might also have a very different approach. So I just like you to kind of to view tonight as in this is my approach. Um, it might come in conflict with the kind of the true forest school approach. And I remember the principles of forest school and the parameters of how a forest school should be run. Sometimes with teenagers, we might deliver things a little bit differently. Um, but I think there's a link. And there's certainly anybody who's on the call with a forest school training or a background in outdoors, all these skills are they're skills that you can pick up, that you can learn, and that you can adapt. So to start off, I suppose I wanted to introduce the idea of work with teenagers as as a mindset that's very different to working with early years. And a lot of people, probably this is quite obvious, but I want to just explore that for a little bit before moving into talking about any practical activities that we deliver. I think what I learned from my time as a forest school leader, and it was really appropriately timed because my youngest was born 6 months before I did the forest school leader training. And I remember learning all about like early years development and propriosensory kind of the how that is so important to kids and how they feel their way through the world. And I think while it's really important to, as a forest school leader with early years, to understand that piece, I think before you start working with teenagers, that you try and really drill into where they are in the world and like what is going to be most beneficial for them in a program. What do they need? Um, what are the areas that you need to, I suppose, what are the activities that you need to put in front of them to help them build confidence and to help them further develop those important skills. So a lot of these are very similar to the early years in the sense that, like, it has to be fun and it has to be positive. There needs to be a positive experience. Teenagers be very quick to turn away from anything that that isn't enjoyable, that isn't going to be fun. Um, but probably the most important pivotal aspect, I think, of working with this particular cohort is that it is a lot based on relationships. And it's the relationships that they have with the other participants. And maybe a lot of facilitators mightn't fully appreciate this aspect, but I think the facilitator themselves plays a really pivotal role. Where perhaps in the early years, the facilitator's job might be almost to get out of the way and to just create the space, where I think working with teens, your role as a facilitator is so crucial. You set the tone, you create that safe space, you bring people on when they need to be brought on, you give people space when they need space, and you create opportunities for the teenagers to build relationships with themselves. Now, saying all of that, I'm not by any means suggesting that a forest school leader with early years sits off in the corner whittling and is doing their own thing. I just think it's a different set of skills that are needed as a facilitator of a teen group. And it's very much based on that idea of a relationship. No different to the early years. I think teenagers need independence. They certainly crave that. They want to demonstrate to the world that they are independent, that they're able to do things for themselves. Uh, and it's a little bit like the early years with the forest school, where you need to give them an opportunity to play independently and to have free play. Where I think with the teenagers, it's maybe a little bit more about you start off from a place of assuming that they can do absolutely anything and everything, giving them the independence to make decisions, to shape the environment, to shape the activities that you're doing, and to really give them that feeling that they're standing on their own 2 feet. Uh, it's youth led in the sense that I think, starting off any program with a youth contract or some sort of discussion around how things should be, and probably not just paying lip service to it, but really giving them an opportunity to feel that this is the group, that they have control over certain aspects of it. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. That'd be very much um, a key part of the teenagers feeling a sense of ownership over the process and a sense of this is really our space. There's an if with the early years you're trying to give them confidence around mobility and balance and free play, I think with teenagers it's very much about learning personal and social skills. So whatever the activity is, actually the core learning we're trying to take from it is giving them an opportunity to try out different roles, to gain confidence in their interactions with each other, um, and learning as many social skills, whether it's about communicating verbally or otherwise, whether it's about learning about social cues, whether it's about learning how to discuss a topic, whatever that is for that particular young person. um, I would suggest they are the key aspects that you're trying to work on a lot of the participants at this age group. Um, so you know, a lot of this, there's a crossover certainly between teenagers and forest school with early years, but it's nuanced and it's slightly different. Um, I think this word social pedagogy, you know, where it's you're creating an environment where they're learning about the socialization of themselves and each other, how they work with each other, how they bounce off each other, which is very different, I think, to the early years where you can have some kids who just love to play off on their own and they do their own thing and they might have little interactions with others. I think with this particular age group, it's really important um, that they're having, you know, constant interaction with other people. That it's so important that they use these environments to develop their social skills, and probably now more than ever with the look, we go on about social media and screen time and technology and all that sort of stuff, but I think um, the absence of environments where teenagers can practice social skills in a safe environment and where you can actually talk about it in a safe environment are quite limited. You've competitive sports, you have school environments. I'm not sure how many other environments there are where kids don't have access to screens and you know there's a real opportunity for them to socialize with people maybe they're not that familiar with. So something to think about there. Um, I was myself and Nick were chatting about this about the you know if you were to think of ingredients that you'd put into a program when you're working with teenagers, like what are the key things that every program should have that you sprinkle in and you make sure that like you know there's elements that are interesting to everybody that keep everybody engaged um and that also the keep the participants coming back. I think first and foremost there needs to be an element of challenge and I love the idea of consequence. Teenagers will really they'll be there saying what's the point, what's the point in this? You know, if there's not a value to something, if there's not a kind of a specific consequence to doing an activity, they can quite often use it as an opportunity to disengage and to step away. Where sometimes if there's just that little element of um down couple of words down is competition, which you know I really think the outdoors is a lovely place not to have competition. So much of what kids are involved in these days have a competitive element to it, but sometimes you might need that. But I certainly think some sort of element, consequence, some sort of finality to certain activities, and then you have to challenge them. So, you know, pitching the challenge at the right level is really important. So that, you know, whatever activity you set them, there is a challenge, be it you know, a learning challenge, be it a social challenge, be it a physical challenge. And if you can pitch that at the right level, that they will be challenged, they will overcome the challenge, then they build confidence from there. If you pitch it too low, they disengage. If you pitch it too high, there's a possibility that you're setting them up to fail. And I've seen this quite often in the outdoors with a facilitator who thinks it would be a great idea to do something really challenging. And actually, what transpires is half the group mightn't be able to overcome the challenge and they walk away from the situation feeling that's another thing I didn't succeed in. And it's reinforcing, you know, um, a negative message that they might send themselves. So this idea of pitching the challenge at the right point is really important. Um, I think it needs a subtle structure for teenagers. Um, Maybe as opposed to the forest school environment where you might have very visible boundary markers. I've always steered away from that in the sense that I might sit down with the group and ask them, well, where do they think we should operate? If I almost feel sometimes if you're using a little red ribbon on the end of a rope or the end of the twig of a tree or a branch of a tree, that's almost like an invitation to, I wonder what's past that. Um, it could very well be the same with early years, but certainly with teenagers, if you put a line that they can't cross, there's going to be characters who all they want to do is get past that. So the idea of unseen boundaries that we've all agreed on can be really valuable to determine that at the very beginning. But again, I'll revisit that. Um, Similar to early years where you have loads of time for free play. Teenagers, I found certainly you wouldn't use the expression free play, but like hangout time. Have your hammocks up, have kind of seating mats around the place, have loads of opportunities that if they want to disengage, but there's a hangout space. This is really crucial. And as much as I'm probably more inclined to structure a session with one activity after another, pop, 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 um, some of my colleagues would be like, they're much more relaxed about that side of things, and they understand it's really important for teenagers at this age that not only is there time to hang out, but there's a space for them to hang out where they don't feel like they're doing nothing. That actually there's always 4 or 5 hammocks up, or there's always a bag of hammocks, and they can grab one and put it up whenever they like. Uh, I think an element of completion and conclusion is important for a lot of the activities that we deliver. And what I mean by that is, um, and again, this isn't a dead fast rule. This is more ideas of how to keep certain participants engaged. If we're doing a whittling activity, and first off, somebody asks, "What are we making?" and I just say, "Oh, we're just taking a bit of bark off the branch." This might they need. What is it we're making? I want to know what I'm making. Um, and quite often as well, they want to know when it's finished. This is something that I can take home with me. It's concluded. Whether it's a dream catcher or a wind chime, or some art piece. A little bit different in the sense that and I've had plenty of groups being really frustrated that they didn't get to finish the whatever project it is that they set out to do. Can be a little bit different for early years, where maybe it's a little bit less organized and it's a bit freer. Um, just a little piece of mine, my experience. And then I suppose I've mentioned youthfuls, and then just finally there I have co-adventuring. And I think the idea of co-adventuring feeds back into this idea that you're a facilitator who is having the experience with them. The the best reaction we've had with teenagers is when they feel that we're in there having the adventure with them. It's very similar to early years, but I think the idea that maybe we're not entirely sure what's going to happen next and how things are going to go, and that they have some element of control, and we're just a participant there to somewhat to keep them safe, but not to direct them fully. Certainly with our some of our other programs, a co-adventuring approach works super well. So I want I'm kind of conscious of time. We're already up to about 25 past 7. Um, I know when Kerry and the IFSA contacted me, they really wanted an idea of practical skills that we could use, or that for school leaders and anybody on the call could use and could implement in their own practice. And and what I thought, maybe I'll just give you an idea of what we would suggest for an 8-week program, involving all of the elements I just spoke about, and maybe treading through little bits of how we'd facilitate this and how we would create that environment where we're co-adventuring. We're trying not to set too many rules. We're trying to give them as much of a voice and a bit of ownership over the process. So this mightn't work for everybody, but for us, we have found this type of approach can just work really well with a group of teenagers. So, for instance, if and quite often our groups are 6 to 8 weeks long. It could be a school completion program where we'll go into a school and we'll be given 6 to 8 students. We'll meet them in the local woods, and we'll say, right, for the next 8 weeks, we're all going out into the woods. We're going to have a 2.5, 3 hour session. We'll see how it goes. And we're going to do a load of activities. But we might start off by having a little chat about what we think is appropriate behavior, and then set off as a group to find where are we going to meet on a weekly basis. And this has worked so well with groups. They've actually gone off into the woods. We follow them, and as a group, they need to negotiate where they're going to have the camp. Um, One of my friends did them up in our side, but one of my colleagues went to Knockma Woods. I'm sure people are familiar with it here, and it's just this massive big woods up on a hill, and the first session was just them traipsing through and chatting about amongst each other where are they going to have the camp, and they found three spots and they visited all of them, and then they finally set their mind on one of them. And by the time they got there, it was just enough time to kind of decide where were they going to do things next week. And straight away there was a sense of ownership over the process. They had picked where they were going to set up the camp. There was negotiations, there was conflict, there was debating going on. There were people trying to convince others this is the best way, and they, they agreed on this is where they were going to be. Um, Now, obviously, the facilitator was able to say, well, look, we're not going to be able to go here for whatever reason. There's live animals, you can't cross a fence, and there's certain rules. Obviously, it's not completely free. But this idea that they can actually, from the very beginning of the process, choose where it's going to be and what it's going to look like. Suddenly, then you can start saying, right, well, we're going to need some sort of boundaries. Where do you guys think it should be, and all that sort of stuff. That could be the first week. You could finish off by lighting the Kelly kettle, having a hot chocolate, maybe toasting a marshmallow, whatever you decide to do. But just that first week, it's a lovely one to get them out together as a group, and to, to kind of figure out where they all are with each other. Um, the second week, perhaps we start talking about, right, we're at our site now. Um, one of the sessions I really enjoy with teenagers is really simple. Each, you divide them into teams, so straight away there's this slight element of competition maybe. Um, and they're all told to go off and build a shelter. They're given a tarp, a couple of ropes. And what we like to do is we like to give them a few, what happens if a storm comes in? Let's all talk about which way the weather is moving today. Is it coming from the west, or, which way is the west? Where's the sun? Um, if a storm comes in, which way you're going to have your shelter. And we might even introduce a few easy knots, the overhand, the lark's foot, the figure eight, whatever the group are capable of taking in at that particular time. But what's a lovely activity there is, at the end of the process, get them all in underneath the shelter, and you throw a bucket of water over them to see does the shelter actually work. And the teenagers, the consequence of that, it's this idea that, okay, we're not just doing this for nothing. At the end of it, there is actually going to be something. Nobody, nobody ever gets soaked. We make sure the shelters are held up quite well. But it's again, maybe something you wouldn't do with early years. But with teenagers, this element of consequence. Can you do an activity which has a conclusion, which has a consequence, which has an element of challenge, which has an element of learning? But actually, what's happening before we do any of that is they're negotiating with each other. Where are we going to put the tarp? How are we going to? It's going to be a lean-to? Is it going to be a kind of a pitch tent? Do we, whatever way you want to facilitate that? But it's um it's just a really simple idea of how to bring it to maybe the next level, where teenagers now suddenly start thinking, oh, this is exciting. There's a bit of danger here. There's a bit of risk. We might get wet. Um, the next week then we might do the fire challenge. And again, everyone who's done fire school or fire school leader, you'll know how to facilitate, explaining the fire triangle. And maybe Nick, my colleague, does a lovely piece around how fire has actually changed the shape of the human face. Even the fact our jaws are smaller as a result of how fire was created, and how we cook our food and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lovely story there you can tell teenagers to really draw them in. And then after you've created after you've facilitated how to light a fire, what we've sometimes done is we've actually set up a little bit of twine between two trees. We put down three fire blankets. We divide them into three or maybe two or three teams, and they have to light a little fire. And the first team whose fire burns up through the little bit of thread that might be a foot and a half high might be the winners. So there's an element of teamwork. It's fantastic watching teenagers under a bit of pressure trying to get a fire, and it's going out, and they have to light it again, and it's falling over, and they're giving out to each other. And actually they're starting to learn, this idea of teamwork. And when you're under pressure, and you supporting each other actually helps more than kind of being at each other's necks. So there's loads to, at the end of each one of these activities, you can go down around the fire with a cup of hot chocolate. You can discuss what worked well, what didn't work well. You know, what did the team who won, what do you guys think worked well in relation to, you know, not the lighting of the fire, the flint or the steel or the wood. It's more about working as a team and how you communicated with each other. So I think there's something there around those two first activities, you know, shelter building and the fire challenge. You're creating an environment where they have to work together. They can't do this alone. They're going to annoy each other a little bit. They're going to have to manage and navigate that conflict and those uneasy feelings when things aren't working particularly well and they have to work with each other. So it's a little bit different maybe to the forest school approach where maybe in ours with teenagers we're pushing them in towards each other. We're making them face in towards each other and we're saying, look, you have to work together. This is going to be the real world. You know, when you grow up a little bit and you go to college and a workplace, you can't avoid working with people forever. So it's a really important piece. Um, that idea that you have to create these exercises and challenges that they need to do with other people that preferably they don't know too well. Um, we do some we do some you know to create the idea of a camp. What you might do after week three is you might give out roles to different participants. So at the end of each week, you might ask them to who would like to take on the role of camp leader next week. Um, who would like to take on the role of timekeeper? Who would like to take on the role of, um, you know, somebody might do a fun game for us when we first arrive, or they might manage the camp cleanup at the end. So each week then from there on in, everybody might take a different role. So suddenly it's becoming their project. They're taking on an element of responsibility. And there's a bit of respect there because we're saying, well, look, you guys, this is your camp. We're not going to tell you what to do anymore, although quite often you're there in the background shouting the instructions. But you know, there's this element of this is your project. We're here now to support you through it. So I suppose just some of the other activities that we do, the idea of hammocks, teenagers love hammocks. Just if you can have spaces for them to hang out, to disengage for the from the group for a little while, where they can be away from the group, but they're also still beside us and they're still part of the group. Um, Before we'd introduce like the normal hammocks, we'll always get them to make a hammock using bed sheets or a tarp, a little bit of hazel and a bit of twine. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with how to make a hammock. If you're not, I'm sure you just Google it or whatever. But um, we just love this idea because it just means then if they don't have something like this at home, they can go home and make a hammock, put it up in their own garden. It's just this lovely idea. Uh, but we'll make them. We'll show them how to do the hammock, but we'll send them off in pairs, so they'll have to make a hammock with somebody else, and then they'll make the second hammock. And you know, so for the first week you could take up half the session showing them how to build a hammock, showing them how to do some knots, showing them, talking to them about, you know, risk assessing where to put it up. And then they head off and they put their hammock up. And then they might come back and somebody light the fire. And you know, that could be the fourth session. That, you know, again, it's a skill that's got a very clear finish. You've built a hammock, you've sat in it, you've succeeded. You now know something that you can take home with you. There's consequence if you put the hammock up and it breaks, you know, there's a real consequence there. So I think all these elements of the previous slide, if you can tick all of those off for each activity that you do, it starts to have meaning for teenagers. They, you know, there's a reason for it, and they like to see that. From our experience, quite often they want to be doing something that has a purpose. Um, Whittling is a fantastic activity. Maybe week five we might introduce the knives if we feel that the group are if we've created enough of a relationship with them where we there's a trust is really important for this one. I think anyone who's worked with uh, teenagers and you introduce knives and sharp tools, there's absolutely an element here that you need to make sure that they're not bouncing off the walls and that they understand the health and safety side of things. So this is quite often you can talk to teenagers about issues around insurance and issues around my own professional liability, and they understand that, and they understand the line that's to be crossed and not to be crossed. So, um, so whittling is a lovely one. Again, what I would suggest, where we've fallen short here in the past is just giving them a piece of wood and telling them to take the bark off. I think actually giving them a very specific, here's 3 or 4 options. You can make a tent peg, you can make a butter knife, you can try starting making a spoon, whatever it is that you want to do. I think having examples for them to follow is good. And then sometimes they don't want any of that, and that's fine. And I suppose when that's the case, you step out of the way. But I think there are certain individuals at this age that they need a little bit of guidance. They want to understand, what is it I'm doing here? What's the overall goal? Um, and then just, I'm kind of conscious of the time as well. Just flying through this. One of the most enjoyable activities a group of teenage lads have had is I divide them into groups of 3 and I send them off with a rope to make their own rope swing. And I've shown them an example. I've taught them the knots, and they will go off and they'll find a tree. They'll throw up the chucker. They'll tread it. They'll do all the knots, and then once they've made this swing, I've seen 16-year-old lads, because it's theirs, they've made it. They'll swing on it for 10, 15 minutes, and they love it. If the swing is there when they first arrive, they mightn't touch it. We've done this. Wow, that's really cool. And quite often they really like the idea that um it's a skill that they've learned. It's something that they can actually bring back and do themselves. So what are the things that you would do in forest school with the early years that you'd have pre-planned and pre-made, that actually when they arrive, the teenagers, they can do that themselves? Showing them how to put up a slack line, getting them to build the low ropes. Again, it's probably not an activity that they jump on if it was just there, but actually if they get to build it themselves and they get to start to play with the idea of ropes and knots and slings and stuff like that, well, actually they take a bit more ownership over it. And again, look, no matter what age you are, there's an element of uh, consequence and challenge and risk and danger with a swing. So it's certainly an activity that has surprised me no end. Um, and then, like, if ever there was a way to a teenager's heart, it's through food and cooking. You could, the idea that, and this is a really interesting one, because I think what I've what I've learned over the last couple of years, particularly with maybe more disadvantaged groups, is that they don't have much access to the kitchen. Maybe there's an element of they're not trusted around the hot stove and the flames or whatever. But actually, when they're out with us and they're cooking on a pan, they're like, this. I love doing this. It could be the most engaging activity. It could be something as simple as frying a few sausages on a skillet. And then what we can sometimes do is introduce tranches the next week. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with it's called a tranja. We use them in our expeditions. And you can cook all sorts of really cool stuff, from soups to curries to noodles to 5-course meals you can do on a 10-piece tranja. So they love that idea. And if you bought a couple of tranches, you could get them working in groups of 3. Somebody could be chopping the veg, somebody could be doing chorizo, somebody could be putting in the sauce. But again, it's feeding into this idea that, in the first week we've explored and we've found our campsite. Then we've created shelter, then we've created fire, then we've made it kind of more homely with the hammocks, and we've started introducing tools, and you can kind of see the progression towards the end. And I've actually written free play down there for the last one. If I arrived onto that site and I told them, okay, you can do whatever you like on the first, second, third, fourth session, I don't know what they get up to. It'd probably be something super dangerous. It might even be kind of damaging or dangerous for some of the other participants. Um, but if we were to follow this 6, 7 week process, and then at the end, I'm like, right, you can do whatever you like. It's amazing. You see one of them grab the rope and they say, I'm going to put a swing up over here, another putting a hammock up. So they've owned the space. They've learned how to interact with it. Um, Now, saying all of this isn't always the way it works. This is your perfect session. You will have loads of challenges. Um, so working with teenagers, I've just written a few little bits and pieces here. because I don't want people to sit here and think, wow, venture out programs, 8 weeks, that just sounds fantastic. It's all wrapped up nicely and everyone's had a really positive experience. Working with teenagers can be really challenging. You can have quite confrontational behavior. You need to be very patient with them. Um, and and you know what? Quite often it's to protect themselves. So if you can read that and kind of figure out who the different characters are, what they need and what they absolutely don't need, you could avoid a lot of this. I've written at the very start, I think sometimes with the teenage projects, they do need a little bit of direction. So there needs to be a focus to a session. For instance, if the first session is exploration, the second is shelter building. Um, where maybe with the early years they come onto a site and that's it. They know what to do. They can go off, they can free play, they can figure out. You mightn't even need to give them any direction. I just sometimes think with teenage groups, you do sometimes need to start off by kind of helping them in certain directions. I think another aspect is um, bringing them all along, identifying the participants that need a little bit of extra support, um, but not doing it in a way which exposes them as needing extra support. I think you need to be subtle in that manner. Um, who are the ones who are shy that need to, um, you need to encourage them to speak up, being creative to figure that piece out. Then, of course, you'll have the ones who will always disengage from whatever activity you give them. Um, so you need to figure out ways to keep them with the group, to keep them engaged as you go along. I think that I've mentioned already they absolutely want to test boundaries. So if you're the sort of person who isn't uh, what's the word I'm looking for? If you are quite structured and anybody moving away from the area or um creating any resistance to whatever structure you put in place, um, then expect to be tested because that is exactly what they'll do. Be it when you bring out the fire, bringing out the whittling knives, um, it's their nature. Teenagers, they want to push the boundaries. They want to see, and I think sometimes as well, they want to see how far they can push the facilitator. They want to see what they can get away with. Um, they absolutely don't want to be looked foolish. So, I mean, I have found in the early stages, for instance, if a talking stick with teenagers can actually put the fear of God into some of them to the point where they will, they don't want to have to speak in front of the group in the early stages. As the program goes on, you can find opportunities for them to have their voices heard. But if you start off and put one of them on the spot to talk in front of the group, um, you can lose them really quickly. And I think being really aware that for a lot of teenagers, speaking in front of their peers, being asked a question, being like brought out, being kind of picked out, let's say even with a question, can be really challenging. Um, Now the flip side of that, that's exactly what they need because to build the confidence, they need to speak up more. But I think when you're working with teenagers, to figure out ways to bring that confidence forward first, and then they'll find their voice as opposed to the other way around. Um, and then then straight after that, it can be challenging to have group conversations. So, um, again, throwing a question out to a group of teenagers, they could very all just look at their feet and you get nothing back. So you could find yourself talking to yourself for quite some time. So again, I think figuring out the group and figuring out the characters and don't set yourself up to be uh yeah, to find yourself doing a lot of the talking would be so maybe activity at the start, lots of activity at the start, and then in the informal spaces you get the conversation starting. I'm aware of the time. It's 10 to 8. I'm going to finish off with some really simple thoughts. What's really worked with some of the groups that we've had, um, some element of community action. Teenagers really like to bring what they've learned back to their homes, to their schools, to their own community. So, maybe building up a program that leads to something. I know one group that we were working with. I suppose they identified all the rubbish that was in the forest that they were visiting, so they decided wouldn't it be great to do a cleanup one of the weeks. And they led on something like that. So maybe how do you get them to take ownership over a specific project? Environmental education and the idea of leave no trace. You could certainly introduce elements of that into the different programs. So once you have your forest school or your base camp set up, um, use that as an opportunity to maybe see are they interested in learning a little bit more about biodiversity and sustainability and conservation. Um, I would suggest with teenagers that your session time is flexible. Some of the projects that we do with youth groups and schools, um, sometimes you got to be able to read it that the energy is different today, or the certain characters who they're bouncing around a little bit. So whoever you're delivering this with, if it's a teacher or a youth worker or some other facilitator, being ready to say, you know what, today isn't working. Maybe what we need to do is something different. Maybe we need to hike. Maybe we need to have a plan B in our back pocket, that actually sitting in camp isn't going to work today. Um, and so being flexible, I think, is really important. Perhaps you even bring technology in. I'm not talking about phones in a hammock, but I am talking about maybe, we've had groups who've done TikToks and stop motion movies and stuff. So not being completely against technology, I think, with this particular age group, but having a rule that, look, during certain times, we're not going to have our phones with us. The weekly roles I mentioned, facilitate, ask questions, and age appropriate. I think quite a lot of the things I found in the forest school approach, I just knew that wasn't going to work for the teenagers. For instance, the boundary markers or the talking stick for some groups. For others, that works perfectly and it's brilliant. But I think being maybe not adopting the forest school approach and just trying to deliver that with teenagers, and just teasing through what might they seem, what might they see as a little bit like age of, is it babyish? Because if it is, you've lost them. The language we use, the manner we have with them, um, I think that's all really important. But sometimes you can only figure that bit out as you facilitate and you learn and you see what works and what doesn't work. Um, I've gone over a little bit, Kerry.
No, that's
I'm
perfect.
not
You're
sure if
perfect.
there's questions coming through, or I know we've about half an hour for questions,
Yeah.
so maybe this is a good time to throw it out to the floor.
Thanks, that Barry. That my paper front and back is completely full. Thank you so much. Like keywords of consequence, conclusion, hangout, co-adventuring, social skills. Like it's just a wealth of information. So thank you. I actually feel like going out to find some teenagers now. So thanks for that. So some questions have come in. Owen has asked, what age range of teenagers, if any?
Oof. I'm only using the words teenagers. Like every group is different. Every group, even though they're the same age, are different. Um, when I say teenagers, look, it could be 10 years. When I say teenagers, it could be a group of 10 to 12-year-olds. It could be a group of 12 to 14-year-olds. We've delivered programs with different ages. I think the key, Owen, is flexibility, is that you show up with an idea of what you want to deliver in your back pocket, and in the other pocket you have something completely different. And as a facilitator, you're able to figure out, okay, this game isn't working. Someone's going to get hurt. This group are looking for something different. They're not engaged. The level of challenge is pitched. So I'm not giving you a playbook, but what I'm saying is, as a facilitator of this age group, it's a lot more complex, I think, than maybe with the early years, because you're dealing with different characters and different needs and different abilities. And then sometimes the same group show up the next week and there's a different strong character, and suddenly things change again, and you need to kind of adapt to that.
Mm.
But I think experience, the only way you get that, like anything in life, is getting out, delivering, and being ready to pivot if things aren't going as well as you thought they might be.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Joan's asking, can you say a bit about how many adults you would recommend with 6 to 8 young people?
We two would be fine. two adults is fine. What we think works really well is one venture out guide and a youth worker from the organization. We do a lot of work with school completion. So these will be teenagers who have school refusal or don't engage with school, might have behavioral issues. So we take those out in a group of 6 to 8. There'd be a teacher and there'd be us as one facilitator. And they're really challenging groups. But actually, what we find is the more rope we give them, the more pleasant and easygoing they are. But the more restrictive we are with them, um, then the more challenging they are. But certainly having a youth worker or a teacher there with them
Mhm.
is important because they're able to, maybe just have a quiet word with them off to the side, or there's an element of consequence there to some degree. Um, if you're it's it's kind of interesting. We don't work with a lot of groups of teenagers where you just, parents sign them up online and 6 teenagers show up. There's usually an element of the group knowing each other beforehand.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know how well a group of 6 unknown to each others would work. It's similar to a forest school. I mean, I think there'd be a huge amount of work creating that space between them to begin with. So I think there needs to be some sort of link, like a youth project that already works with these kids, and they bring them now to your forest school for 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
Great. Thanks, Barry. There was a bit of discussion around your cooking trangia, but yeah, Amber found the right word, so we've got that figured out.
The,
Um,
the
Laura,
tranches are really cool, and they operate off methylated spirits. So, again, you don't have. So if there's somewhere you can't light a fire, or you don't think it'd be appropriate to light a fire, these little self-sufficient tranches, you can cook your food on a little bit of mets, and the only issue is cleaning them up afterwards. So.
great. I think we'll all go to buy one now. Thanks, Barry. Laura asked a question you might have just answered, but how do ratios work for risky play with teens, like knives and ropes, etc.?
Yeah, for knives, I think our ratios from an insurance perspective is 2 to 1.
Mhm.
So, you do need extra staff there, or else you have them divide into groups. Um, the ratios would be similar. If anything, the ratios for our insurance goes up as the kids get older. So
Mhm.
for younger kids, it's actually it's a lower ratio, 1 to 6 or something. For
Mhm.
teenagers, it could go up from 1 to 8. But then obviously there'll always have to be two facilitators there. So, but as I said, like with the school completion group, we'd never go out um with any more than 8 in the group, even though ratio wise we could have 14 or 16 even, but it just wouldn't work. So there's something about I think the number somewhere between 8 and 12 is the perfect number for all of the work that we do, be it the expedition, be it
Mhm.
the group-based work, or even when we're working with adults. Any more than kind of 10, there's just not enough space for people.
Mhm. Great. Thanks, Barry. Joan says, amazing. Thank you. Powerful stuff. Can you talk a bit about how you and your colleagues debrief and assess in the broadest sense, the next steps for the group as a whole and the individuals as well?
So I yeah, there's so much to say. Like I haven't really spoken about the youth work piece there. I've mentioned it. I haven't really spoken about um the piece in between the activities where we might say to the kids, actually would you guys mind if we do just a really small exercise on, let's say, health and well-being. Um, and what we might do is we might bring out some laminated cards with words on them, and we might get them to maybe even put it down a piece of rope, and we'll say that rope is from, at this end of the rope is 0, at this end of the rope might be 10, and we're going to talk about, let's say, the 5 pillars of health and well-being, and we say, let's talk, what do you think they are? And sometimes they guess, sometimes they say nothing. But we might have 5 laminated cards, and we say, well, sleep, diet, exercise, social connection, spirituality, whatever the 5 kind of keywords are. And then we might get them to position themselves along the rope with regards to how happy they are in their own life with regards to that specific aspect. So, are they sleeping well? How much sleep do they get? How much sleep do they need? How important do they think it is? Exercise would be another really important one for teenagers, and how much screen time. So you're talking about the debriefing piece. Sometimes you get great conversation. Sometimes they'll talk and you're like, that's it. We don't even need to bring out the rope. We don't need to think creatively about how we're going to get feedback. But other times you might actually need to get them up moving and split them into small little groups to go off and chat about something and feed back to the group. Um, so it wouldn't be like, for some of our adult groups where we do personal development, a lot of people in recovery, they're really well able to talk about what's going on for them. They can talk about the issues. They can talk about relationships and behaviors and triggers. Um, for the teenagers, they either don't want to have their voices heard. Maybe they feel exposed. So thinking creatively about how you get them to feedback is really important. Um, we do an idea where you can write something on a post-it and you clip it onto a washing line in the forest, maybe a word that's creating anxiety for you, and then the rest of them can go up. It's all anonymous. They can read what other people have said, and then maybe finish off by throwing them into the fire to symbolize moving on from that particular issue. Or so there's lots of ideas there, but certainly for us, the youth work and the personal development piece is really important. So we'd use lots of laminated cards, lots of props, lots of creative ways for them to feed back that wouldn't leave them sitting in front of a group with a talking stick feeling like they have to talk and maybe they haven't even constructed what it is that they'd like to say.
Great. Thanks, Barry. And Yuki's asking if teenagers come and what they want to do is only hang out and chat, do you just let them? And if they refuse to do any activities like knives and games, etc., do you just let them be?
If it was a full on like rebellion, none of us are doing anything. I think we'd probably have a chat about what do they want this group to be. Is there, we take that approach. But generally what we found is you'll get a small group that are really like, this sounds interesting, I want to try it. And two or three might say, I'm going to sit this out and sit in the hammock. Um, I think that's absolutely fine.
Mm.
As long as they're not pulling the rest of the group away or they're not being negative towards the activities that we are doing. If it was a full group and we just called it hammock group and we just went to the forest and we all slept in hammocks, if the youth worker that employed us to do this came to us and said, this is exactly what these kids need, then we'd be like, okay, now let's give them a session of sitting in the hammocks. And then the next week we'll try and bring something else in. But
Mm.
sometimes it's that like maybe let them sit in a hammock and they're like, okay, I'm kind of bored of this now. So what are you guys doing? But if you say you can't sit in a hammock, you can be damn sure that's all they'll want to do.
Mm.
So I would just be of the attitude that when you clash and you're not co-adventuring and you suddenly become the teacher, you're setting yourself up for conflict and resistance and that can be really frustrating. But yeah, absolutely. Once you introduce the hammocks, that's sometimes all the kids want to do. Um, remember one particular young fella who, again, it was through school's completion, and the teacher came up and whispered in our ear, we've never seen him this calm.
Wow.
Like he actually needed just to lie in the hammock for half an hour. He went back to class. He was a bit more calm than he was, but he was so used to bouncing around and causing trouble and agitating others and hitting people with sticks that when he actually sat in the hammock, it was actually like, you know what, maybe this is all this kid needs every week is to come away from the chaos, lie in a
Mm.
hammock. Um, but no, I think I'd probably have an issue if it was every week, eight kids came and just all lay in a hammock. I'd be questioning, right, are the activities we're not putting in front of them challenging enough, engaging enough, exciting enough, and then we'd probably have to try and pivot slightly.
Mm. Great. Thanks, Barry. Birgit's asking, are all of your facilitators male?
No, no, not at all. Myself and Nick, who founded Venture Out, were we'd work a lot with the male students from the school's completion. But we've lots of female facilitators who jump in and help out with the different groups. We do find now that in particular the tougher groups, maybe groups from the traveller community in particular, they they the youth workers will tell us they need strong male role models. So they'll specifically request that we need men to come in and work with these young lads. Um, Venture Out also deliver a we call it our Two Wolves program. So that's very much about going into schools, working with senior cycle students, transition year, fifth year, and sixth year, um, and we work with just young men. We bring them into the local woods for 3 hours, and we talk about issues around masculinity, consent, pornography, but we front load it with two or three bushcraft activities like the fire challenge, the shelter building, and whittling. And then when they're sitting down to whittle, the male facilitators will talk about, hey guys, what's the story at the moment? What do you think of this guy, Andrew Tate? They'll have loads to say about it. What do you think of this? And some of the conversations that you get are fantastic, but we couldn't bring a female facilitator into that environment because the young men just mightn't feel comfortable to say some of the controversial things that they might be thinking or feeling or wondering, is this normal or is this acceptable? So there's certain programs where we will have male facilitators on request. But no, we absolutely, female facilitators for any of the teenage groups would be brilliant,
Gosh, that Two Wolves program, it sounds amazing. Wow. More questions coming in. Rory's asking, how do you split the teen ages? So 12 to 15, 15 to 18, or do you have a certain, do you split them at all?
Yeah, no, we would. I think yeah, you would have to. Sometimes it's 11 and 12-year olds. Sometimes it's 13 to 15. Sometimes it's 12 to 14. But it's usually that 2 year bracket.
Mhm.
Um, it's just the developmental stages that they're at.
Mhm.
It's what they're exposed to as well, and maybe some of the conversations we're having might be pitched at a different age group. If you have a 12-year-old there with a number of 15, 16-year-olds, um, so yeah, I think from a safety perspective as well, there's different levels of maturity and ability. So what we'd normally do is just work around a 2 year gap, and quite often the youth workers and the teachers will push for that as well.
Great. Lisa's asking, how do you finish up the session with the teenagers? Do they help with the cleanup, or what do you do?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So whatever they put up, we have to take down. We need to leave the camp as we found it. So I mentioned earlier about the role swap. So if we have a camp cleanup leader, well then their job is to get everybody in like one of those FBI body search kind of lines, and we'll all walk and pick up all the rubbish, put it into the bag, and once that's done, we all put our bags on our back, and so we'll bring a load of rucksacks, and the kids carry the stuff in as well. So it's slightly, and that's generally how we'll always work, as opposed to them arriving and everything being set up for them. I think there's an element there for teenagers that, they're well able to do this stuff, and I think they respect it more if they put it up, and they respect it a little bit more if they drag it in. So, in relation to the wrap up piece, um, it is nice to get them around in a circle. So, what we'll generally do at the start and at the end of each session. And again, this doesn't always work brilliantly, but like a lot of the time it just creates that environment. And we do this on our expeditions as well with adults, and even the New Roots personal development programs with adults. We start off with a nice an energizer, some sort of fun game, which gets everybody into a circle. You're not necessarily telling everyone, right, you need to tell us how you're feeling, and you might go around and say, tell us what's the last thing you ate, or what's the last thing you watched on TV last night. Something really small. And again, you're thinking of the kids who this the last thing they want to do is talk in front of the group. They certainly don't want to be asked a question that, where they have to show some sort of um feelings or emotions which might embarrass them, or somebody else might snigger or whatever. So starting off with an icebreaker is a really nice one, or an energizer, a fun game. And there's loads of those on the forest school leader training. Some of the ones that I actually remember thinking, these are the absolute silliest games. I'll never get any teenagers to play these games. By the end of the program, I will think, I'll try this one. And after you've created that environment where they've been with each other for 6 or 7 weeks, they'll actually do it. But if you did that game on the first day, I think you might lose them forever. Um, and then and at the wrap up, we might do something similar. What's really nice is like one word kind of feedback.
Mhm.
Just ideas that where they can hear the voice, they're not being really put in the spot, and you're getting a little bit back from them, but you're not kind of asking too much. I think
Mm.
kind of a mixture of all of that stuff is really important.
Great. And Rory skipped the queue there. He snuck in another question. He said, how different are child protection guidelines with teens regarding confidentiality and disclosures? Is it the same as with children?
Exactly the same.
Yeah, great.
All the exact same. Under 18s. Um, there's nothing I would suggest if you're gonna start working with this group, just treat it exactly the same.
Mm.
Exactly the same. I wouldn't change a thing.
And Ethan is asking, do you ask them not to bring phones? How do you manage this?
Yeah, some groups we just straightforward. This is like so the school's completion groups. They're coming from school, so you're not allowed to have a phone in school. You shouldn't have one on our session. The
Mm.
teenagers afterwards, we might say to them, What are your thoughts on this, guys? Like, how do you feel about it?" And if they say they need their phone, and you drill into that a little bit, and then you start asking, "What is it we're trying to do here?" So I think a blanket no phones, um, is what you're pushing for, but how you get there is really important, because again, it's about them feeling some level of ownership.
Mm.
Um, but no, you don't want them retreating to a hammock and sitting on a phone. And we've had that issue where it's an after school program and the phone is in the pocket, and we go around to the hammocks to see how they're getting on, and three of them are on the phone. Um, so we might bring them back in and have a chat about, what's the value of them coming to a space like this, and spending time in each other's company. And but it's a funny one, because you start making rules from the beginning, and again, we're back to the first slide, which is, you're suddenly the enemy and you're the teacher. So it's about bringing them along with you, I think.
Mm. Lovely. Thanks, Barry. April is commenting, just saying, amazing work. I'm an outdoor play therapist and social worker working in private practice and also in residential care with adolescents and social services. Brenda is saying, thank you so much. Sparked so much thought and inspiration. Jill's saying, amazing. Thanks so much. Lots of great info. Grania is asking, how did you create the links with school completion programs, and do the schools seek you out?
We How do we create the link? I think I can't remember now whether the school's completion worker uh, approached us, or whether we approached the school. I know we were certainly working with the school, delivering the Two Wolves programs, um, bringing their senior cycle kids out into the woods. And in that particular school, we were chatting to the principal, and they were like, "Oh, this would be great for a couple of the young lads who are bouncing off the walls. And honestly, we just need to get them into school. We need to give them some sort of carrot, some incentive to be here. And we also need to chill them out a little bit, and we need to give them some sort of positive educative experience where they're learning something, but it's not like your traditional rote learning, which is just sit in a classroom." And I think it just developed that way. And once we delivered one program at school's completion, it was easy for us to go to another school and say, "Yeah, this is working really well with these guys. Would you be interested?" And a lot of the school completion agencies or officers, they'll work in 4 or 5 desk schools in an area. So for anyone who's thinking about delivering stuff like this with schools completion, I'd say just get in touch with them, and have a chat and see, look, do they think this would be a value? And yeah, it's just communicating, and design a really simple program, and give them your qualifications and stuff.
Great. Thanks, Barry. I think that's the end of the questions, unless anyone else has anything else. But that was so informative. It's really inspirational to know that these teenagers and this youth are getting these resources in Galway. If only this could spread across the island of Ireland, I think it'd be amazing. Even just talking about the troubled teens. Just imagine them being out in the woods and being able to express over the fire, or through whittling and bushcraft is just, yeah, very inspirational. So thank you so much, Barry. Yeah, everyone's saying really interesting webinar. Thank you so much. So you have Barry's contacts. So yeah, have a look on his website and Instagram, and yeah, keep in touch. I just contacted a local secondary school, and they love Forest School for their transition year. Great. Yeah. Like Barry said, I think it is just a lot of schools might not know about, taking the children outdoors or Forest schools. So I think just contacting the principal or, you know, through the Parents Association, I think you'll be amazed by the support that you'll get. So thanks so much,
One
Barry.
piece of advice there, Kerry, is a
Yep.
school will want you to take out the full class. That's the way they operate.
Mhm.
They say, look, there's 30 students. Good luck. Come back in 3 hours. Brilliant. We'll pay you, whatever. Um, that's how schools work. They want to replace a teacher. There you go. If you bring 20 to 30 transition years out together, and you haven't split them up into small groups of 8, maybe 10, that's going to be pure madness. So just hold firm, maybe bring them out in small groups. Don't just out of enthusiasm to make a link with a school and to get the ball rolling, agree to take out the full class because it's in their nature. And transition year groups in particular, to be a couple of participants who will want to really push the boundaries. So that'd be my advice. And just Kerry, just finish off. I really don't want to give people the impression that this is all really simple and just follow this game plan. Like, I think work with teenagers can be the most satisfying, but absolutely the most challenging. And some days you will just have to call it and say, this isn't working, guys. We're packing up. We're going to go home. We're going to come back next week. We're going to have a chat about how we're going to do things differently. But the way things are going it's not working for you. It's not working for me. And sometimes you really have to be willing to make that call, to show them that you are look, I'm willing to walk away from this if the behavior or if people continue to do whatever is going on. So I just wanted to finish on that look, it's the most rewarding, but I think to be able to be able to have that confidence as well, to know when it's working for them as well as for you.
That's great. A lovely way to end, Barry. Thank you so much. Oh yeah. We'll close it there. So thank you so much, Barry. Thank you to IFSA. And just so for everyone else, our third and final webinar will be on March 24th, and we'll be welcoming speakers about working with neurodivergent learners. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks, Barry. Good night. Thanks, Kerry.
See you, folks.
Thanks,
Million.
Kerry. Thanks, Barry.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Night, Kerry.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks a million, Kerry. I'll hopefully see you on the other side of the screen soon.
Yes, we'll definitely have to meet soon, Barry. Thank you so much for tonight. It was fantastic. Really, really well done. Thank you.
And good luck with your training down in Kerry.
Might drag you in at some point.
All expenses paid.
Of
There's
course.
5-star hotels down there, I'm sure.
100%.
Lovely. I'll see you again.
Thanks, Barry. Take care.
Thanks so much.